Pseudo-Dionysius. It's interesting. The authority of Pseudo-Dionysius seems to be from the understanding that he was a first century figure and a figure that was mentioned in the book of Acts. And we know today that he was not a first century figure, most likely a figure from the 5th, 6th century, and we know that today mostly because of what he was drawing from. Neoplatonist figures such as Proclus. During the Reformation, figures like Martin Luther attacked Pseudo-Dionysius, saying that he Platonized more than he Christianized. Reformers pushed back against specifically the ecclesiastical and celestial hierarchy idea that Pseudo-Dionysius had in his works, and the Reformers thought that it mimicked a Neoplatonic ascent. They felt that Rome was drawing from that hierarchical system and the ritual framework. Felt that the sacraments had this idea of this automatic hierarchical conduit of power, and they felt like it operated more like the pagan theurgy rituals. That ritual idea of theurgy, as David Bradshaw talks about in his work Aristotle East and West, he says Iamblichus's writings ultimately became definitive for Neoplatonism in the eastern half of the empire. And some suggest that Iamblichus's Neoplatonic theurgy profoundly influenced Eastern Orthodox ritual mysticism. This is specifically through the synthesis of pagan ritual with Christian theology in the works of Pseudo-Dionysius. You even see this on the Reform side, where Calvin is dislodging the anthropological focus of ascent and puts it on Christology. In Proclus's Neoplatonism, the ascent to the one involves the transformative triad of faith, truth, and love. And David Bradshaw says that Christians through Dionysius find a way of making the procline ascent their own. Some see that the Dionysian theology is foundational to the Eastern Orthodox tradition. I don't think that's controversial, but by adapting these theurgic principles for Christian liturgy and justifying them as pathways to God, since matter was seen as the work of the Creator, thus inherently sacred. The dominant position among scholars today is that sacred portraits existed, as Leslie Brubaker says, but there is no indication that these images received special veneration in any consistent fashion before the late 7th century. So if a lot of this theology is coming from Iamblichus and Proclus, and then we know now today that Pseudo-Dionysius is most likely later, like 5th, 6th century, then it makes sense that maybe this was foundational to what would become of the icon veneration centrality. In Paul Rorem's work on Pseudo-Dionysius, he's given a commentary as well as an introduction to his influence. He's very influential. See Dionysius's influence on figures such as Maximus the Confessor, who integrated Dionysius into Eastern Christian theology by emphasizing the logoi. We see the great Thomas Aquinas in the West also utilized Dionysius's concept of participation. He took the metaphysics of explaining how God gives existence to all creatures yet remains utterly simple. Here's Dionysius. He says, in reality, there is no exact likeness between caused and cause. For the caused, he says, even the concepts revealed or caused in us which stand behind the names God, life, being, Father, or Son, carries within itself only such images of their originating sources as are possible for them, whereas the causes themselves are located in a realm transcending the caused. Dionysius says, since God is a being in a way beyond being, he bestows existence upon everything and brings the whole world into being. Yet he remains one, nothing less than himself. He remains one amid the plurality, and united throughout the procession, and full amid the emptying act of differentiation. If differentiation can be said to apply to the generous procession of the undifferentiated divine unity itself, overflowing with goodness and dispensing itself outward towards multiplicity, then the things united even within this divine differentiation are the acts by which it irrepressibly imparts being, life, wisdom, and the other gifts of its all-creative goodness. See that Pseudo-Dionysius is foundational for the Exodus and return model within the Christian tradition, a metaphysical cycle framing reality as flowing outward from an ineffable divine source and subsequently returning to it through spiritual ascent. God freely creates the world to share his being. The further things are from God, the more distinct and pluralized they become in the one and the many. We see that entering a state of exile, return is the upward journey of the soul moving from multiplicity back towards unity. Also, we see Proclus saw that visible symbols raise the soul to the intelligible. In the 5th or 6th century, Pseudo-Dionysius adapted theurgic principles for Christian liturgy, describing sensory rituals and sensible, intelligible via the senses, objects as pathways to God. Going back to Luther in the Babylonian Captivity of the Church, he says, I completely disapprove of giving so much credence to this Dionysius, whoever he was, since there is practically no solid learning to be found in him. I definitely think Luther goes too far there, but does Pseudo-Dionysius go too far in his Neoplatonic synthesizing?